How is it that family and friends in both the Siders and the Turpin cases say they didn't know what was going on?
And immediately I was denying it. I was like, there's no way. And so until I saw proof of the house and saw proof, I had a hard time believing it. But I defended Louise on a lot of things that I knew wasn't true. Like, as far as them saying the kids never owned a pair of shoes, I knew that was a lie. That was a lie. The kids ate every day. They just got to eat one meal.
That's my interview with Louise Turpin's sister, Elizabeth Flores.
People get in their minds that it can never happen in my family, or so-and-so could never do this. But that's exactly what we thought about Louise. Nobody would have ever thought Louise would allow that to happen to her children, or that she would even participate or do that to her children. And so I think it's important for people to know that it does happen, and it can happen to anyone.
None of us know what's going on inside someone else's house. Even if they are family members, we don't know what's actually happening behind closed doors.
That's a forensic psychologist answering your questions as people continue to compare the two House of Horrors cases. But first, do me a favor, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and hype the episode. I'm Matt Johnson, and this is Justice. Here to help break it all down, we have a very special guest. We have forensic psychologist John Delatorre. When we're talking about the Siders family in Ohio, and that's a case that's still playing out right now, a lot of people are comparing it to a case that I covered in California, the Turpin's case.
What some are calling a house of horrors
inside a family home in Southern California.
13 siblings living in deplorable conditions
that were tortured and abused in a so-called House of Horrors. What similarities do you see between those two cases, if any?
I think we start with just the sheer number of victims in the case. You know, you don't often see such big numbers in cases like this. I mean, we're talking about 12 in one case. We're talking about 18, 19, 20, depending on, you know, at what point in time the children are alive. I think the similarities then extend into who's engaging in these crimes. You know, when we see numbers this large, we're often thinking about group homes, right? We're often thinking about these large scale sort of facilities that are harming children. But these are parents, right? And sometimes grandparents. We don't actually know sort of the multi-generational abuses and traumas that were being experienced in the Siders household. We have a pretty good, clear understanding for the Turpin household because it was just the two parents, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't multi-generational traumas being experienced in that house. And so oftentimes, you know, the crime is going to be child endangerment because that's the clearest crime that can probably be proven as true. But the squalor and just the abuses that these children experienced is just so heartbreaking. And I think, you know, it's difficult to wrap your head around just the extent with which parents seemed willing to harm their own children. I think that can be kind of hard to fathom.
You know, when I was covering the Turpin case, I interviewed Louise Turpin's sister, and she seemed to be unaware of what was happening within that home. And we're talking about a case where David and Louise Turpin pled guilty. They had 13 children. This is in Paris, California. They pled guilty to 14 felony counts. The children were shackled. They had chains. They were tortured. It was false imprisonment allegations, lack of hygiene. They didn't have knowledge or vocabulary. I mean, this is really dire circumstances there as well. I want to play a clip from that interview, and I want to ask the question afterwards, you know, how is it that people that are close to the family members don't realize what's going on?
And immediately I was denying it. I was like, there's no way. And so until I saw proof of the house and saw proof, I had a hard time believing it. But But I defended Louise on a lot of things that I knew wasn't true. Like, as far as them saying the kids never owned a pair of shoes, I knew that was a lie. Me and Louise were always close, and I knew that that was a lie. And I had pictures to prove that. And I even lived not far from her for a couple of years, and we saw each other every weekend from 2008 to 2010. So I knew that there was a lot of things that was exaggerated that wasn't true that I did defend her on.
Now, this interview was done with Elizabeth Flores back in 2019 for my original podcast, True Crime Deadline. The information still relevant, still informative, and still shocking. And is it true that they were swingers?
I know that they have been. I don't know how long that lasted. I know of one incident. I know that one time of that happening, and then I know she created a MySpace page to attract men to swing with. I don't know if there were any more incidents after that, because she knew that I lectured her on it, and a lot of times when I would lecture on stuff, me and her have a very different lifestyle. She would shut down and wouldn't talk to me about it. So I don't know if any more of that went on and she just kept it from me or what.
Yeah, so is there anything that you want to clear up with the case? Let me ask you that.
Well, as far as the kids not having very many clothes, Louise always went clothes shopping for those kids, and they had expensive name brand clothes. And I used to even go clothes shopping with her for those kids. Her kids always had shoes, very cute shoes, lots of shoes. They wore them. I know that for a fact because I lived, like I said, not far from her. We saw each other every weekend from 2008 to 2010. I always had family portraits sent to me of the kids 2 or 3 times a year. She would send pictures out to the whole family. They always had shoes on in the pictures, different outfits. They would say that the kids would go months without eating. That's not true. From being in court, from hearing the kids, from talking to the kids when we were getting phone calls before the case started, from talking with the detective, that was a lie. The kids ate every day. They just got to eat one meal. Louise went through some financial issues because they weren't spending their money right, which is her fault. I don't condone that either. She was wasting their money and doing casinos and stuff. And she was in a financial spot, and I think they were having a hard time financially with groceries. But I also know that they were also withholding food for behavior also. But I do know that the kids were, even when they were being withheld food for behavior, according to the kids, they were eating one meal a day.
Perhaps that's what the abuser wants you to think, right? Oftentimes when we deal with situations of domestic and intimate partner violence, the level of isolation that the abuser is having on the victim makes it so that other family members, other friends, other people that could have done something to intervene are kept at arm or further than an arm's length away. There's different methods with which the abuser can make that happen, oftentimes appearing as though things are okay, sort of gaslighting people that could provide an intervention, gaslighting them into thinking that, they can't actually do anything or that there's some other motivation at play. These are all tools, tricks, skills, games that abusers end up playing.
What was your reaction when you were hearing the allegations then? Were you in shock? Was the rest of the family in shock?
Yeah, we were all in shock. I was actually nauseated. I mean, we were all in shock. I couldn't even speak at first to tell my husband what had happened. He kept asking me what was wrong. And I mean, I had the exact same, my husband told me I had the exact same reaction as I did to my mother and father's death. That's how bad it was. So we were really shocked.
And you're a mom, you have 7 kids, right?
Yes.
Did you see any signs?
No, I would have done something if I had seen signs. I never saw any signs. Of course, I wasn't around her much at all. We've lived on 2 sides of the country most of our lives since she got married. I was 8 years old, except for between 2008 and 2010. And when I lived there, I never saw any signs. Yeah,
was there a breakdown in the family? Was she isolated?
You mean before she was arrested?
Yeah.
Yes, she done that to herself. Yeah, she isolated herself from all of us. And I was really the only one that she kept in touch with when she isolated herself. She even isolated herself as far as physical contact from me, but she would keep in touch with me through Facebook and over the phone with me. But yeah, I was the only one in the family she kept in touch with. And we had no contact for 2 years because I blocked her off of everything because we got into a big argument when my parents passed away in 2016. So I had no contact with her up until she was arrested. And so she was isolated from the whole family, yes. I actually used to tell my kids, I'm sorry, I wish I could give you the life that Louise gives her kids. She was always taking them on vacations and everything, and I never could afford to do that with my kids. You know, my kids have never seen the beach. They've never been to Vegas. They've never been to Disneyland or Disney World. And Louise was always doing these things with her kids, and I used to always tell my kids, you know, I'm sorry, you know, and then when the case broke out, you know, I told my kids, well, you never know what's going on behind closed doors. It doesn't, you know, anybody can paint a picture. And to me, in those pictures, the kids did not look bad. But I go back through my pictures all the time of me, Louise, and Teresa growing up. And we ate 3 meals a day, and we were tiny. So it runs in our family. So I guess that's why we never saw any signs. When I would see pictures of her kids, even Mama used to tell me all the time, my grandmother, mine and Louise's grandmother, my mom's mom, she used to say, people would talk about how skinny Louise's kids were, and we were like, Mama would say, all of our kids are skinny. And that was the truth, you know, like we were all tiny, and we all ate well growing up. My dad made sure of it. So never thought anything of it. And since the cases broke, I've looked and looked and looked and looked at our childhood pictures. And I just never saw it.
In your book, you wrote a book, and it's called Sisters of Secrets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about her experimenting with religion, and you get into the fact that, you know, she was obsessed with witchcraft, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, but satanic rituals, what does that mean?
She messed around with like the Ouija board and snakes, the whole thing, and the books, like the witchcraft books and stuff like that. And I don't know if she actually messed around with like the voodoo dolls or not, but she talked about it.
Is that why there was dead animals in the Texas house, do you think?
I have no idea. I wondered about that. But I know that they owned a lot of animals, and I wondered if they just died from malnutrition. She just left them there to die because she couldn't afford to feed them, or what. I also thought that could have been what had happened, because I know she was really struggling financially and said she couldn't even afford to feed the kids.
Do you think that any of the abuse that happened to the kids were part of a ceremony in her religion?
I never would have thought that. But after the case broke, that's the first thing that crossed my mind. I mentioned it to our cousin.
What'd you say?
I told my cousin nobody knew about the witchcraft except for me. And when I found out, I told Louise, I said, I would really watch that stuff. That's very serious stuff. Like, I wouldn't have that around my kids. And she kind of laughed it off. She goes, oh, we don't practice it around the kids. We go to a hotel. And when the case broke, I was sitting on a plane with my cousin, and I told her about the witchcraft. And I said, I'm wondering if some of this abuse to the children had to do with the witchcraft, had to do with some of the ceremonies.
I'm not going to say that witchcraft didn't play a role. What I'm going to say is that witchcraft probably doesn't play the role that she think that it did. It could have played a role in convincing someone that they have more power than they actually did. It could have played a role in convincing other people that there's, something more nefarious, something much more overarching at play than the reality of, they believed that their children were objects for them to use as they saw fit, to punish as they saw fit, to dictate how they're going to live their lives as they saw fit. And that's hard to, I think, for the rational mind to kind of negotiate this notion that the family members are engaging in these abusive behaviors because they want to, and in order to push other people from stopping them from having that power and control, they make people believe that something is at play when it actually isn't.
And they tend to move around a lot. And that's a similarity that we've seen in both of these cases, as it's been discovered with the Siders family. Going back to the Siders case, a family member was interviewed, and again, they also said they didn't recognize anything going on. And if there had been a problem, they would have intervened or given money or helped the children. I want to play part of that.
Chance to talk with Ronnie Fletcher today. He married into the Siders family, and he said 2 decades ago it was just your typical American family. He married one of the 3 sisters and says that the girls had a normal upbringing, and he's heartbroken to see what's happening now. He also says as a result of all of this, his family is facing violent death threats.
I mean, that was a typical American family, you know what I mean? Yeah, getting by. You know, they didn't have tons of money or nothing like that, but, you know, they always had a clean home, you know what I mean? The kids always went to school. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, they had beautiful daughters. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what else to say about it, you know what I mean? Like, and the stuff that's saying that this been going on for all these years, and, you know what I mean? It's crazy.
He said if they would have realized or knew how dire the situation was, they certainly would have helped. He says they were kept at an arm's length, and for about 7 years, they didn't know exactly where the family was. He said anytime there was a phone call, it was usually a request for something. In one case, they gave him a car. In plenty of other cases, it was for money to pay a utility bill, and one of the sisters would step up and make sure it happened.
So I think that there's 2 things that he's discussing there. I think that he's discussing the family that the mother in question comes from, right? And how maybe that was the clean house, because I don't think it's the house with the 16 children that's been talked about. And then he's talking about the house with the 16 children and the 4 adults, the grandparents and the 2 parents. And he's saying that whenever he heard from them, they needed money. So again, I think that this is an example of what you were saying, where kind of people are either seeing what they want to see, or they are, you know, being presented a different scenario than what's reality. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. None of us know what's going on inside someone else's house. Even if they are family members, we don't know what's actually happening behind closed doors.
Why is it important to share your story?
The reason why I share the story is so make people aware that it is out there and it can be in your family, and to open your eyes. If a family member comes to you and says, look, we're struggling financially, start looking for signs that the kids might be going hungry. If they say that they're having trouble with kids' behavior, start looking for signs that the kids might be being mistreated. People get in their minds that it can never happen in my family, or so-and-so could never do this. But that's exactly what we thought about Louise. Nobody would have ever thought Louise would allow that to happen to her children, or that she would even participate or do that to her children. And so I think it's important for people to know that it does happen, and it can happen to anyone.
I think as a psychologist, you know, I'm often asked to think about, well, what could have been happening behind that closed door in order for this specific behavior to unfold. But the truth is that someone who is abusing someone else will use any kind of deception that they can, up into, you know, straight lying or just leaving, right? Just picking up and moving so that their deception doesn't get revealed. And I think too often we see red flags, but we talk ourselves out of it, or we see yellow flags and we talk ourselves out of it. I think we assume that the face that someone presents to us is the legitimate face that's there. We're not masking something underneath. And I would suggest, and I would contend that at that moment that the family that had been, you know, had beautiful daughters and had a clean home, right? Those are all superficialities. And so once that family that you had once held in high regard and high esteem started, you know, falling on hard times, yes, giving money is certainly helpful, but perhaps they needed something else. And where were you then, right? What did you think then? Where were your behaviors then? So I think too often that what's hidden behind closed doors and what's presented to us are often looked at as the same thing, when the reality is very, very much different.
As we're comparing the cases of the Turpins and the Siders, again, the Turpin case has already been litigated. It was 2019 when I covered the case in California, and I was there at sentencing. An emotional day in court as we heard from the children for the very first time that were tortured and abused in the so-called House of Horrors.
My parents took my whole life from me, but now I'm taking my life back.
Sometimes I still have nightmares of things that had happened, such as my siblings being chained up.
And at the sentencing, only the mother, Louise, addressed the court and her children and her family after some of the children gave statements.
I want to say again how truly sorry I am for everything I've done to hurt them.
When I was in court on that day that you were also there, sentencing day, she broke down. So do you think that that was an honest apology?
I think at that point it was.
Did that surprise you when during the sentencing, the children, a few of them read letters and they said that they forgave their parents and that they were praying for them?
Well, not really. Most of them said that they forgave their parents, but a couple of them said that they were more forgiving towards Louise, if you noticed. And the whole time the case has been going on, I know that the kids have directed more towards David being the fault of all this. And if you noticed, a couple of the letters even said that he was the mastermind, pretty much. That's not how they worded it, but they said that he made Louise who she is, and that when he was at work, she would rock in the rocking chair and cry and say she didn't know what she was to do and she was sorry. And I think, the kids understand that she was scared that she would lose the kids too. Even one of the letters said that she was scared she was going to lose the kids too, and she didn't know. She was scared. She cried out for help. She'd lose her kids. I think Louise was sick in the mind. I'm not making excuses for her. I don't condone what she done. But she was sick in the mind. And I think David helped contribute to that. And I think that she couldn't see like a healthy mind. Well, if I lose my kids, at least they would be in a healthy situation,
What does she have plans for her life now? Does she want to have a relationship with the kids? Does she want to change as a person? What has she said about that?
Yes, she told me that she hopes that she'll have another chance with her children's relationship, and that she hopes that they can forgive her and that she can have the best relationship she can moving forward.
It's very clear that Louise was not a victim, right? She pleaded guilty. She's in jail. She participated in all of this. But in the Siders case, even Elizabeth Siders' attorney has questions. I want to play this for you, and then we'll continue our discussion.
I don't think she would classify herself as a victim. That was, I asked her that question in a couple roundabout ways, and she did not have a typical victim-minded mindset when answering. She did say that she misses her kids. And that's one of the things that shocked me was the first question that she asked me was, are the kids okay?
Again, that's very different from Louise Turpin. The Turpin children claim that they didn't know their mother or see their mother much. And you're having the Siders' mom, Elizabeth, asking about her children right away. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that true crime media has really allowed the opportunity for the audience to understand that there's a nuance between who is a perpetrator and who is a victim. And that this is a case where the truth about the dynamics, the relationship dynamics that were happening inside the Siders household may be much more complex than we recognize it being. Where the Turpin case, I think where we have the added benefit of time, we have the added benefit of a case actually being adjudicated. I think we have certain privileges at understanding and interpreting what happened in the Turpin case. Just because someone asks for their children doesn't necessarily mean that they're asking because they have an intention of wanting to bond with their children or return to their children. There's certainly an element to say that, that she's asking for her kids because she doesn't want them to reveal the truth about what was happening inside that household. There's so much more for us to understand in terms of why any of this happened, that I think we get the benefit of having at least a sort of an official adjudicator of what the truth is with the Turpin case. And we still haven't seen that because I think the truth about what was happening inside the Siders case is probably much darker and much more complex than we recognize it being.
So the question is, could mom also be a victim in the Siders case?
Yeah, I don't see why not, but that doesn't negate any responsibility that she holds for what happened in that household. Now, it could be that as a victim in the case, there was no real agency and authority for her to provide an intervention, that even if she wanted to, she couldn't. But the law doesn't necessarily see behaviors as a spectrum or nuanced. I think the law often sees what someone does or doesn't do in a very black and white scenario. And I think that goes towards, is child endangerment going to be the only crime that any of these people face? Or will a prosecutor add more? Right? That child endangerment doesn't necessarily have to have a knowingly and purposefully element, criminal intent associated with it. That there are other crimes that potentially could be charged against any of these family members, including Elizabeth. And those may be more indicative of what the evidence is going to say in terms of, did she knowingly or purposefully engage in a behavior? And so, could she be a victim? Yeah. Could she be a perpetrator? Yeah. Is she both? Probably. And I think that requires a much more sophisticated understanding of the dynamics of abuse, a multi-generational abuse, when I think at a time when people just want adjudication, the realities of how people live life are not the same as what a court of law suggests that it is.
Yeah, and I can't get past, when I look at this video of her and her arraignment, of the bruise on her arm. You know, to me, that looks like maybe she was also confined in some sort of way. I have no proof of that, but I want to know more about the mark on her arm and how it got there. Talk about rehabilitation in cases like this. We know, again, the Turpin family, the mom and dad, are serving 25 years, maybe more, behind bars. Siders hasn't been adjudicated yet. They haven't been found guilty. They haven't received any sort of sentence. But in these cases, when there is guilt, is there rehabilitation, or can they not be saved?
Well, anybody can be saved. I think that different element is, do they want to be saved? Are they put in a position where saving is an option? I don't know. Again, I'm not saying that prison shouldn't exist, but what I'm saying is that if you think prison rehabilitates people, then you probably need to spend more time watching documentaries and talking to people about prison life. Is rehabilitation possible? Of course it's possible, but someone being rehabilitated is more about the level of internalization that rehabilitation is offering. If you have spent your entire life believing that life is a certain way and that you, as a member inside of that world, must respond in a certain way, then maybe not. Then maybe rehabilitation is not possible. But if you're a victim and you've engaged in problematic behaviors because you were ordered to, because you were compelled to, because if you didn't do it, the abuse would be much more significant. I think there's an avenue of treatment. I think there's an avenue in which you can live a productive life. But again, a lot of that is up to the person receiving the rehabilitation, as opposed to, I mean, you could have the world's greatest psychologist in the room, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be successful.
What are you going to be watching for in this case?
There's a gag order a lot, right? On a lot of stuff, and I think now would have been the time to see the pictures, to see what's true about what was going on in that house. I think what was happening inside of there was much more darker, and I think I believe it was much darker because of the reason why law enforcement finally found these children. And so, with this case, I'm going to be looking for more about what was going on, why was it happening. There are a lot of questions that a lot of people have in terms of who was in control, who had the power. These questions are much more sophisticated and nuanced than just simply asking the question. There's a lot that's happening here, and it's because of the dramatic nature with which all of this was uncovered and how long all of this has been going on. There's just so much to learn.
Well, our thoughts and prayers go out to those children, of course. And John Delatorre, thank you for your time. How can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me on all the socials at Dr. John Delatorre, and my website is resolutionfcs.com.
And I'll have all the links in my show notes below. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Matt.
If you would like to learn more about the case, just head to the video section of this YouTube channel. I interview a number of experts, including a crime scene investigator who talks about what was collected inside the Siders' home and what actually might lead to more charges in the case. Also, I have a link below. Please check out my audio podcast, True Crime Deadline, where I dive into a lot of cold cases. I have exclusive interviews with detectives, and probably a lot of cases that you might not have heard of. You can check it out on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, but please binge listen to it and leave a review. Thank you very much for being a part of this YouTube channel and for watching the video. Please hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already. In the meantime, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.